Hello and welcome to everyone who's joining us around the world for this really very, very special Will Wednesday series. So this is our Male Champions of Change session. And we're very excited to be introducing many of our male champions of change, including Jude Fitzgibbon, Andy Davies, and Chris Flowers, who will be joining us today with some of their mentees to discuss the relationships that they've had and provide us with some tips on how we can set up our own important mentorship relationships that go on to be successful. And I should just add, I found out today that it's actual National Mentorship Day here in the UK. So it's very timely that we're having this meeting here today. So before we get started, I just want to say a big thank you to all of our audience members who are joining. A big thank you to the Women in Lymphoma Steering Committee, and particularly to Anna Steiner and to Rachel Oakley, who have been providing the administrative support for this meeting. And also to thank our sponsors who are sponsoring these educational sessions. So that's Janssen in Australia, Bygene, and BMS. Thank you so much for your support. We really, really do appreciate that. So now what I'm going to do is hand over to my co-chair for the meeting, Kate Cwynarski, who's going to introduce our first discussants. That will take about 15 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to ask some questions, and then we'll have another 2 sessions of discussants after that. So please do have your questions at the ready. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks very much. So I'm going to introduce both Jude Fitzgibbon, who has been a mentor for Jess Okosun. I just want to mention, so Jude Fitzgibbon is a professor of personalised cancer medicine at the Barts Cancer Institute, and he leads the Centre for Cancer Genomics and Computational Biology. His research is focused on the genetic and epigenetic changes responsible for the development and progression of leukemia lymphomas, and also as well as evaluating therapeutic strategies to reverse these changes. He chairs our UK NCRI lymphoma science subgroup. He has a number of other roles, including with Blood Cancer UK, the BJ Heme, but he's also male change champion for women in lymphoma. So Jess Okosun, I had the fortune, she was our registrar on a number of occasions, and she has fantastic clinical skills, but she also has fantastic skills also in the laboratory. She's an assistant professor and a Cancer Research UK clinician scientist at Barts Cancer Institute at Queen Mary, as well as a practicing attending consultant hematologist at Barts. She received her PhD under the supervision of Jude Fitzgibbon, and she now leads a lymphoma research group focused on using high-resolution technologies to understand the processes that govern lymphoma initiation. She also works with Cure the Lymphoma Foundation, as well as other roles in journals. And I mean, again, their CVs are both very impressive. So Jess, I was going to ask you first, just to talk a bit about your experience, sort of generally things that you could talk about with Jude mentoring you, and then I'm just going to ask you a few questions, ask you to ask him a few questions.
Great position to be in. So thank you very much, Kim, and also Kate, for the very kind introduction. So I've had the pleasure of knowing Jude for probably longer than a decade now, when I first started out as a clinical PhD fellow in his laboratory. And then subsequently, I got my independent fellowship transitioning to lead my lab. And I think it was sort of a no-brainer that I was going to ask him to be my mentor, particularly through this sort of, what we sometimes think of this sort of leaky pipeline, this challenging period. So he's, started out as a supervisor, but now a mentor to me. So yeah, a great pleasure to have him continue to be my mentor. So I think that some of the things that one of the questions was like, what's unique about Jude? Why is he a fantastic mentor to me? And I think one of the things that really stands out in terms of his characteristics is that he's incredibly approachable. Many of us that do know him know that he has this personality trait. He has an open door policy. He's always very honest. He has this sort of what I call Irishism, or sometimes I call Judism. He says exactly what he thinks. And he has a knack of sort of being able to pinpoint exactly when I haven't done something right. If I've, written a manuscript or an application, he tells me it isn't right, although he doesn't tell me how to correct it. So then I have to go back and try and work out what I think he means, and to go back and reflect, and then I come back and improve it. But I know that when he says something isn't right, it isn't, and it makes me go back and think. And I think that's something that I think has stood me in good stead over the years in terms of how I improve things. And he's always been present for me. I think that when we think about mentors, we always think about people that leave sort of several doors of opportunities ajar for me to sort of think about. But actually, he provides this other arm for me. He provides this kind of psychosocial, emotional arm, the nitty-gritty stuff that people don't talk about, that is needed to accomplish the sort of various goals. So I think him being able to provide that for me has been, incredible in the sort of the 10 years that I've known him. So thank you very much, Jude, for that. And I will continue to knock on your door and ask you questions.
I just wanted to add something else. So I remember when Jude, when Jess, you were on your maternity leave, and I met Jude at a conference, and I was just so delighted because he was so delighted that you were enjoying your maternity leave. He wasn't sort of telling me how he was desperate for you to come back and finish your research. So I don't know if he practiced that for some time, but I was really impressed that he managed to convey to me how delighted he was that you were enjoying other aspects outside the laboratory. I'm just going to ask Jude, in terms of what are your biggest challenges of finding and mentoring promising females?
So I think it's very hard to make generalizations in relationship to gender. I just think that immediately when somebody comes in, sits down beside you, explains to you what their interest is in lymphoma, what their motivation is, maybe some of their history. What I quite like is people who haven't had an easy journey. One of my mentors, Andrew Lister, once said that for a lot of clinicians starting in the laboratory, they've never failed before. They've been successful in everything they've done. And they come into the lab, and it's the first time that they fail. And it can be quite challenging and humbling for them, not only being in a lab where they're not a little god anymore, but they're actually learning from very junior members of staff. And so immediately you could see that Jess has worked very hard to get to where she is, and I think everybody probably has. But you have that steady determination, and I think immediately when there's a rapport with somebody. I think you at some stage you need to be able to be very honest and to have a very open conversation. So that means not just being very positive all the time, but actually saying when something isn't quite right, or we need to work on this a little bit harder. And I think the beauty and the success really of our working relationship has been that we've had that honesty and that trust. And I think that we see things very similarly. And it's been, because Jess said some very nice things, but it's been a pleasure to be a mentor and to support somebody who is as talented and also as committed as Jess is. I think the other point I'd make is, and it goes back to Andrew Lister as well, is that we make a good team because I'm a scientist. I'm not a clinician. Dare I say it? I know I don't look 20 years older than Jess, because I'm not. I'm about 15 years older. I'm a molecular biologist. I have interests in both leukemia and lymphoma. And so in a way, I'm not rubbernecking. And I think one of the greatest difficulties I see and challenges I see for a lot of youngsters coming up is that they're competing with their supervisors or competing with their mentors to some degree. And I've never felt that. That's not to say that there's some challenges in every relationship and we have to work these things out. But I think that difference has helped us, and it helped me in my relationship with my mentors too.
Well, it's an interesting one because Jess did her PhD with you, and now she's leading a group within the same department as you. So as you say, your relationship has both evolved as well.
Yeah, and we had to work through that period. It's like shared authorship, Jess showing her own independence, and I think that it benefited us that I work on leukemia as well, and so that I have a different focus. And probably I think Jess has made some very nice observations in relationship to single cell analysis, and that's not an area that I've pursued or been interested in sufficiently. And I've moved on maybe to look more in epigenetic therapy. So we've kind of worked together to find enough overlap, but also clear blue water in relationship to what we do. And so I think it's terribly important, and you see it all the time, that the big boss is the last daughter, and the new up and coming boss is the first daughter, and then there's no opportunity for the younger members in either group to actually develop and develop their own careers. And I think that what's working for Jess and myself is that there's always room for the new and up and coming individuals to actually get senior authorship, get on the ladder and start thinking of how can they develop their own careers.
I mean, Jess, I recall, I think it was a year ago in Nature Communications, I think, about there was a manuscript, it didn't have an editorial associated with it, where it talked about, you know, senior authors, but it tried to equate authorship with mentorship. And I don't know if there was sort of quite a Twitter storm because some of the conclusions from that manuscript. I don't know if you wanted to talk a bit about just your role in the science.
No, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, here we are talking about he for she, you know, male champion. I think, of course, there is a huge role for female mentors as well. And I think that it's critically important that, and I think when I was starting out in the lab, I can't remember who gave me this bit of advice, but it's something that I think is critically important, is that you really need to build a team of mentors. And if you think of kind of, we're sort of into sort of the Marvel sort of superheroes, each superhero has got, you know, different aspects, right? And so really what you want to do is build a kind of a mentoring Avengers team somewhat. So every mentor has a distinctive skill, distinctive network, distinctive expertise, and they will cover the different blind spots that you have, you know, during your career. And that can be female mentors, male mentors. And I'm very, very lucky and privileged that I actually have a number of male and female mentors. You, Kate, obviously I've known you for a very, very long time. And so you know, I think that that's really important. And I think that the article that you mentioned that essentially said that there is no benefit in having female mentors, because basically if you want to accelerate your career, that it's better having a male mentor. I completely disagree with that. I think that you have to surround yourself with a number of different types of mentors because, you know, you're going to have a number of different blind spots during your different career transitions.
And I would just add to that. I think that you know, we've all experienced cosmetic reviewing of grants when we throw them around internally, or people saying our presentations are just wonderful and the slides are great. And you need to find mentors who you feel comfortable with, and it doesn't make a difference, you know, whether it's a man, woman, cat, or a dog, as long as they're able to have that rapport with you. And you can actually have a very open discussion where there's no point scoring and there's nobody being clever. It is purely a case of how you can improve on the quality of the work that you're doing. And I think that when that works, it works for everybody because there's a codependency, because the mentee becomes a mentor of sorts and guides the mentor in the same way as that the mentor might be trying to guide the mentee.
And Jude, before we move on, I'm just going to ask you, I mean, how do you provide opportunities for those who aren't forthcoming with advertising their own talent? I mean, Jess is very restrained, but I suppose she shines talent. But what about those people who may have imposter syndrome, men or women? This is not gender specific, but people who may not rate themselves. It's not about gender, but how do you, you know, mentor, nurture those talents?
So there's two things I think you should think about. So first of all, I say to everybody, and everybody has heard it in the group, is that you know, when you go out and you give a presentation, or when you meet a collaborator, or when you meet somebody at a meeting and you're chatting to them, what you want to be able to get across is that you, as the researcher, is the brains behind the operation. It's not Jude, and you want them going away saying, you know, Jude is clearly good, but this person is very, very good. And everybody needs to embrace that. And this is what we try and work on then. Because if you're having your one-to-ones, if you're having your seminars, you know, when I started asking questions at seminars a long time ago, my heart would beat. I wasn't sure of what I was going to say. I had to construct the question in my mind. And then you learn how to talk off the cuff, to present a coherent view, but it takes time, it takes effort, and you have to do it in a compassionate environment. And that's when it's part of a family within the lab group itself. And so I think those things are very important to to try and instill that presence, that you are an individual, you're a scientist, and therefore you have an opinion. And I need to hear your opinion because I see things from a very different perspective. And you might see something that could be far more powerful than anything that I see. And we try and kind of embed that in the way we work. And I think that's worked for Jess's group and for my group. And I think individuals didn't buy into that because they want to be credited with the work that they do. And so it helps pull the individual out from a slumber. But I would say that if you're a very introverted person, the key thing I think is to have a very good project, because that generates your story, and your story or your clinical trial generates a story that's very easy to sell, and people will come to you as well. I think career advice is great, but you really still need to have a very good project to go with a good mentor and good guidance, but you need a good project or a good trial to develop that clinical career or that clinical scientist career.
I mean, we don't need to focus on reverse mentoring, but I'm delighted that you have such a fantastic relationship, for the sake of lymphoma. And on that, I'll move on to Kim chairing the next part. Thank you both.
Thanks so much, Jude, Jess and Kate. That was absolutely inspiring. And now it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce our second set of speakers. So Andy Davies is a professor of medical oncology at the University of Southampton. And he's also his professorship actually is in hematological oncology, which is rather interesting for a medical oncologist to achieve that aspiring title. And Andy is the outgoing chair of the NCRI high-grade lymphoma group and very well known across the UK and across the world for the fantastic work that he's been doing in developing studies in diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. And he's going to be joined today by two of his mentees. So Harriet Walter is a medical oncology consultant at Leicester. Now, she is associate professor and has been there since 2019. As well as being an honorary consultant in medical oncology. And she now leads the early phase unit at Leicester University and has a specialist interest in novel therapies. Jemma is rather at the earlier end of her career in that she's a specialist registrar in medical oncology, also at Southampton, and she's in the final year of her PhD. So we've got two people at the sort of other end of the spectrum, if you like, to where Jess has arrived at. And I wanted to start with you, Harriet, and just ask you about the relationship that you've had with Andy and what, how instrumental was he in allowing you and enabling you to achieve your goals, particularly leading the early phase unit?
And thanks for the kind introduction as well. So I sort of first approached Andy actually in 2016, and at that time I just completed my PhD with Martin Dyer at Leicester and decided that actually my hematology, I wanted to get into hematology, and my particular interest was in clinical trials. And at that stage I was planning sort of fellowship applications, and the fellowship that I wanted to apply for was the CRUK Clinical Trials Fellowship. And because of this and sort of having some initial discussions at Southampton, suggested that I make contact with Andy. And he sort of helped me to develop this application and really sort of provided support and guidance from someone outside of my host institution. So I think that was really, really key for me, because actually previously before my mentors had been internal. And actually having someone just providing a different perspective and a fresh perspective on your career and sort of opportunities as well, that was key. And then I actually spent time with Andy down at Southampton, spent 3 months there in the clinical trials unit, and also attended some clinics with him as well. So from that, I got opportunities to sort of meet new academics, and particularly in the clinical trials unit. And actually, I've continued to sort of collaborate with several of those as well. So, and I think at this point in my career, it was just really instrumental to have somebody from transitioning from after you've done your PhD and sort of getting prepared for consultant applications, and having that sort of step and help at that stage was really, really vital, I thought. And I think, afterwards, I've continued to ask for Andy's advice sort of since then. And I think sort of I've used, as Jessica said, sort of a network of mentors actually. So I think I've been very fortunate through this approach.
So it sounds like you found each other at a very critical time in your career, and that external support and ongoing support that you've got now is really, really helpful in allowing you to achieve your ambitions. So Andy, I might ask you, you mentoring two women that are on the call today, but you've obviously mentored many men as well. Do you think that there's a difference in mentoring men and women, and are there specific challenges and differences that you have to overcome, or do you see everyone as the same?
I think that's a really good question, and I'm kind of gender blind about this. I think you know, what we like to see is people who are passionate and enthusiastic and evidence of commitment to, you know, to a career in lymphoma or to do the project that you've kind of set up. And I think that that's you know, regardless of gender, I appreciate that there, as a woman in a career in lymphoma, that there may be some additional hurdles that we perhaps need to consider as we kind of go through a career. But I'm just want an individual who's going to be committed to going to the place that I think that they can go to, if that's what they want. And you know, it's great to be able to see the potential in individuals. And you know, mentoring sounds like sounds very formal to me. It sounds like a very formal kind of hierarchical structure, and that's not at all what I want to get over. What I want to say is I want to give people the opportunities, and if I can help in any way along that journey, to provide people with opportunities to do projects or to papers or whatever it might be, or opportunities to meet somebody who might be able to help them with jobs or might give them an opportunity to work in a new environment they've not tried. That to me is the mentoring, rather than it being kind of a formal structure that, you know, that we meet or whatever. It's about helping people on their road to discovery what they want to do, and to ultimately get to where they want to be. And that's how I see the mentoring relationship, rather than necessarily sometimes in the UK universities we use mentoring as a much more formal, structured description of a relationship, which to me is not what this is about. This is all about providing opportunities.
Thanks, Andy. I mean, Kate and Jude both alluded to the fact that not everybody is forthcoming, and a lot of people do suffer with imposter syndrome and get the butterflies in the meeting when they're trying to think about the question that they want to ask, and feel that they're going to look stupid if they ask that question. So bearing in mind that, you know, you've mentored quite junior women in their career, how did you support them to kind of get over any lack of confidence that they might have had? And how did you spur them on and make them realize just how fantastic they actually are?
I think the first thing to say to everyone is we all get imposter syndrome. I don't think there's any of us who doesn't get imposter syndrome, and there's not one of us who suddenly thinks, am I going to go and stand at the mic and ask something that's a bit daft that I probably have seen I should have known the answer to? Or am I going to stand on that stage in front of several thousand people that I'm giving this plenary lecture to and say something a bit stupid? And you will think, is that really me doing this? And I absolutely think all of us recognize this, and none of us should be afraid of that. Okay, absolutely none of us should be afraid. I think what's really important is seeing potential in people and encouraging them. And if you see somebody's done something good that's promising, is to show them that and to help them open or push open further a door if they have done something or they want to do something and they've done a good job at something. You know, and that means, you know, they give a presentation. It may be a presentation in a small scale way, actually, and to give some feedback and to give some encouragement, or to write a good manuscript or to write a good review, and to give that so that people know actually what they're doing is of high quality and is valued, and they should feel confident about what they've delivered.
That's so true, Andy. And I can remember, I suffer a bit with imposter syndrome, and I can remember an occasion when I gave a talk, and somebody very, very eminent in the UK, I won't name him, but he sent me a personal message afterwards to say bravo. And I cannot tell you what a boost that gave me personally. And it's, you know, it's the little things like that that actually make such a huge, huge difference. Jemma, I might come on to you now, because you've also had the benefit of having Andy as a mentor. Would you mind just talking through your relationship with Andy and how it's become a success for the two of you?
Sure. So I first met Andy in 2013. It was a point in my career that was quite a challenging period. I'd just come out of GP training and realised that GP wasn't for me. So I was quite kind of disillusioned with medicine at the time and didn't really know where I was headed. And fortunately, my first junior doctor job in hospital, I was the lymphoma SHO for Andy and Peter Johnson, which was utterly inspiring for 4 months. But unfortunately for 4 months, then you have to move on and do your next rotation and things. And I think one of the things that struck me was that he still kept in contact with me during that time that I'd left, because I think it's very difficult as a junior doctor when you're rotating around all the time and you're trying to form relationships with people. It's very disruptive. You've got to tick a lot of boxes. You've got to kind of do a lot of assessments, and to try and establish kind of a interest at that point is challenging. But he kept in contact with me, and I was very much kind of inspired from the time that I spent with the team. We ended up at the end of the 2 years of my core medical training kind of doing a ACF application, which was successful, and I'm grateful to all of the mentoringship, and I did have some female mentors along the way as well, which was great. And then ever since then, kind of it's not been, as Andy said, kind of a formal thing. It's very much sort of a catch up and, you know, oh, see how you're doing, and opportunities and things, rather than actually, oh, we meet every 3 months or so and kind of take stock. You know, there's been other challenges on the way that I've had in terms of having babies and things like that, you know, again, as a male mentor, you wouldn't expect somebody necessarily, well, you know, Andy's been very understanding of all of that as well, as the job. So for me, that's been invaluable as well.
So you've been very lucky in finding somebody as fantastic as Andy to mentor you, and the same with Jess and Jude, you know. But what about, you know, not everyone can be a mentor. And, you know, we've heard a little bit today about what makes a good mentor, you know, someone who's not competing with you, somebody who's going to congratulate you and recognize your achievements, someone's going to provide you with opportunities and support you. If you were to give some advice to the younger women in lymphoma that are on the call today, who haven't yet got a mentor, what else should they look out for? How should they find that hero that's going to help them to reach their goals?
I think if you're inspired by somebody, it was so stand out for me that, you know, I felt a little bit beaten down by kind of general practice, and that, you know, I hadn't felt that I was very good at it, and somebody that kind of really supports you and gives you that push, and because you are quite sort of vulnerable and not sure of yourself when you've only been a doctor for a couple of years, and you know, try and put yourself out there and just say, you know, this is what I'm interested in. And if somebody, that's all kind of I really had to say, to be honest with you. I hope I did a good job, and you know, proved myself in that way, and to say that, you know, I'm really interested in this, and that's all I really had to do, to be honest. But I'm very lucky that I had a team around me that picked up on that, and you know, I didn't really have to really push myself to be out there about sort of, you know, how good I was or whatever. I just sort of showed an interest really, and hopefully did a good job, and then, you know, that here I am now. So.
Thanks for that, Jemma. I might come back to Harriet actually and ask Harriet the same question really. Have you got any tips that you can give the younger generation out there?
So I think, so building on from what Jemma was saying, I think it's actually about finding somebody that is approachable, but also actually going to give you an honest opinion. So, you know, what is going to work, what isn't going to work. And I think as a mentee, you know, if someone does provide some suggestions, and don't take it as a criticism, actually, you know, learn from that, and actually, I think, take that as a next step building block. I would also say that I think it's fine to have more than one mentor, and use both external and internal mentors as well, because I think that was really helpful. I have a couple of people that I go to for different reasons, and I know they'll give me a different perspective, and some perhaps will be harsher than others, but I think that's actually helpful.
Thank you.
I think this is really important, to have your mentor or this relationship as a critical friend. That's exactly what you want. So you want to be able to have that supportive relationship as you will have in a friendship. But just like your best mate tells you when you're being stupid, or you're not making the right move, or perhaps you're doing something that you might think about doing differently. I think of it very much as this critical friend.
A critical friend, and also the mutual talent. So you each recognize each other's attributes and support them. So in fact, it's not really a hierarchy, it's more of a partnership, really. And Jess and Jude certainly demonstrated that very nicely as how they are now working in a very close partnership. So Chris is running a little bit late. So I thought what we might do in this next session is invite Jude and our other panelists to take their mics back off again and just ask a few broader questions. And the first one is about gender inequality, and that relates to panels and committees and meetings that are often male dominated. And we see that when we go to ASH and Nagano, and we sometimes see that in even our internal meetings. So the question first to Andy and Jude is, how can you actively promote this reversal of the gender imbalance so that we can give more women opportunities to be visibly in leadership roles like that? Maybe
Can I go first, Andy?
You'd like to start.
Sure.
So I think Women in Lymphoma has kind of, opened my eyes to the situation, because I think a lot of men are oblivious to this difference, and I think that education that we're getting now is very important. It's giving us a direction. So, for example, there was an EHA guidelines meeting that I was on, and when you flick through the Zoom call, I noticed there was 24 men on the call, and there was no women at all. And after 2 minutes, I said, hold on here, lads, there's something not right. We're all men, and I can't quite understand this. And I think that there was some embarrassment. There was everybody wasn't saying, well, this is a really terrible thing, we have to change it. But there was a recognition that this is not right. And I think what happened was that over the next half an hour, 45 minutes, we looked to identify fantastically well qualified people that had been overlooked. And I think that there's more of a balance there probably now. Also I've been invited to sit around the table and have a chat and have a video at ESH meetings, which I think are very male dominated. And there was 5 men invited, and I went to ESH and I said, maybe we could get some more women participants. There's fantastic people at the conference. And they did come back and said they asked and they couldn't find an individual who was happy to actually present. But I think that's going to change, because I think in every man's view and every person's view now is that we need to support, and people need to be invited and to learn the ropes, and to show that actually they should be leading, they should be chairing. And I think it's something that Jess has said as well, during her fellowship program, when you go for interview, you can find that the panels that you're being interviewed by are heavily male dominated. And I will tell you, if I went into a room and there was 6 women looking at me, asking me questions, I would find that different. And I think that it's really fair and reasonable that these panels have to be balanced appropriately. So I think men are now that we've been, the light has been shone in our eyes and a level of ignorance has kind of disappeared, I'd like to think that the Women in Lymphoma kind of brief will actually be delivered on very quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Jude. Andy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the work that the Women in Lymphoma is doing is really excellent. I love the way that the conference organisers get a letter afterwards saying what percentage of chairs and speakers, etc., were different genders. I think that's really important. I mean, one thing that I'm very conscious of is in my invites is that you're ensuring that there's a breadth of different individuals that you when you get the opportunity to invite people, that you making sure that you're being as inclusive as possible. So I'm sure all of you will know, for example, that if you do ASH abstract reviews, that you have the opportunity to nominate next year's abstract reviewers for ASH, and you have the opportunity to help choose people who are, when you've been reviewing abstracts, who are going to chair the sessions. And so to my mind, it's really important that we ensure diversity when we do things like that. When we start on grant awarding bodies and your time comes up and somebody says to you, well, who do you think might take over your role when you've done your 3 years, that you include a range of people in those invitations. When you send out your manuscripts or your grants for review, that you have a range of people who are necessarily invited to be reviewers, and we pass on reviews when you're doing editorial stuff for journals as well. So I really believe that those are opportunities to promote inclusion, really, and I think, as Jude says, shining the light on it is really important, that all of us are very conscious of that, because we absolutely need to ensure that we are inclusive and diverse on the panels and the organizations that we sit on.
And
Thanks.
it was just one other thing I was just going to add, that I think that at grants panels there's been a very important shift away to the opportunity for every applicant of any gender to explain why they might be a gap in their career, whether it's maternity, whether it's a caring situation, the challenges of COVID, and the fact that there's probably more of a requirement on mum rather than dad, probably, in relationship to a lot of the work. But I can see from a few of the panels that I've been on recently that is much more vocal and is much more taken on by the panels. I don't think it's 100% yet, but as I said, I think it's moving in the direction that women in lymphoma are hoping to mentor.
Yeah,
I think some organizations are much better at this. So some organizations don't consider diversity as well as they ought to. Some organizations ensure, for example, I'm chairing the DLBCL guidelines for ESMO. Absolutely, the people who are contributing to that really come from a diverse background, and it's enshrined in the constitution of the work that we do that there is diversity in it, and I think that's so important.
So I think that addresses the question you were raising, Kate. Do you want to elaborate? Because you were talking a little bit about diversity in the chat box.
My signal's terrible, so I'm going to let Astrid take over, just because the question about really sort of retention, really, of fantastic women, maybe like during different phases of their career, and also involve Loretta and Carla in the discussions, because I'm interested whether different issues in the US to the UK, but I'll let Astrid take over.
Okay, absolutely. We haven't had the opportunity to introduce Loretta and Carla because we're still waiting for Chris Flower to join us. But both of you have been very successful in your careers as women in lymphoma. So do you think you face different challenges as male in careers, and what can other women in lymphoma do, or what are their efforts in order to succeed also? Not only, I think both of you have had very great opportunities regarding the place where you work, and also what would be your advice for other people with other opportunities?
I guess the first thing I'd like to say is I can't be more excited to hear what's coming out of our 2 male champions. And I think this highlights what we were hoping to acknowledge and put on a pedestal, that we really need male champions to shine lights in areas where we may not even be in the room to acknowledge or bring attention to. And so thank you so much. I also want to point out, you have a similar phenotype. Both of you mentioned that you don't see gender, you see talent and you see opportunity. And I think that's really what we're hoping to focus on, is we want to be on the level playing field. And what I have experienced in the US is that I felt like my fellowship, I was pregnant with twins. I'm all of 5 feet tall. I was a round ball. And I initially was underwhelming to my leukemia colleagues, which was my focus. And it wasn't until I ran into Chris Flowers that I really felt someone could acknowledge or see beyond just my mom potential. And so I guess that's my question to both of you. How do you see talent, and how do you recognize it, given I'm sure you have a plethora of people reaching out to you to be mentees?
I think Andy described it very well, because the minute you meet somebody, you know whether they're being false positive. They see it as a career move to get a PhD. They're interested in the end game rather than necessarily in the journey, the biology, the patient. I think there's a lot of doctors that I meet, and you can see that. I think Andy and Jessica would fall into a category. I'm sure everybody around here is, but the care for the patient and the fact that you want to do better for them. I think that comes across in spades when you meet certain clinicians, and you can feel that desire and that interest, and the fact that they have a resilience. And, you know, it sounds like what you said in relationship to being pregnant and finding a way at an early stage in your career. You have a resilience, and all those features make a huge difference, I think, in success. And I think the PI then wanting to find you a project that's going to provide you with that vehicle to excel and to be successful. I'm not sure what, Andy, you think.
No, I think you've framed it very nicely, Jude. You know, I see so many people who come knocking on my door because they want to have a project, and that's from junior people to more senior people because they've got boxes to tick, and you can see that very clearly that actually there's no passion there. But I think when you speak to people who genuinely have an interest, and I think I go to Jude, you know, I'm always intrigued by people who are motivated by the patient-related question or something that they have seen particularly, and that just comes over when you meet people. And that doesn't necessarily mean that when you meet people you need to be gushing and over the top when you make that first impression, but actually you can get the feel, as we all do from our everyday conversations. We know the people who really are, you know, interested, and you can see, I think you can see talent really quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with Loretta. I thank both Jude and Andrew for being so willing to advocate for women in the absence of women when it's visibly the case. I think that that's something that in a weird way, and sadly, it's been customary, and it seems almost it's become a normalized experience up until more recently, where the value of diversity in a group of highly intellectual people that think about a problem, you know, I think that that's becoming increasingly more important. So I again, thank you for being advocates for women. In my particular case, I too was pregnant in fellowship with both of my children, and also I'm 5 feet tall, so Loretta and I have a lot in common. And I was very fortunate where my mentor started in fellowship with Craig Moskowitz, and he has a very unconventional mentorship approach where he basically said, you know, you're going to be like my daughter, and I'm going to tell you what you should do and what not to do. And, you know, I really welcomed that. And some people bristled at that, but to me, it felt like a very natural relationship, which sort of evolved in a very organic way towards my career in lymphoma. And later on, I came across Jonathan Friedberg here at the University of Rochester, and Chris Flowers, who helped me significantly in many, many areas. And what I'd like to highlight is that, you know, the relationship with Chris was something that I'm so grateful for. That was really an opportunity I neither expected nor really sought. It was really something where I have to say he must have seen something in me that I clearly had no idea I possessed, because, you know, he really sought out opportunities for me and provided me with opportunities to meet on a regular basis and identify opportunities that I really would have otherwise had no opportunity to obtain on my own. And so, and I think that sort of begets its own catalyst. It's a catalyst for everything else that has subsequently come. And it's just this one interaction that you don't really, you have no idea how impactful that could be subsequently. And I think that so much of careers in medicine and just overall careers involve these chance opportunities that you have to grab them, and you have to always be prepared. Like Jude was saying, you know, have your elevator pitch ready, because you really have no idea what might become of a one chance opportunity with someone, and it could lead to such a beautiful array of interactions and things in your life that you would have never dreamed possible. I know that's definitely been the case for me.
Thank you. So, Chris, we want to welcome you to this panel. Thank you very much. You had a great introduction by Carla. So we have already heard Andrew and Jude's opinion on the different challenges facing as a mentor for women. Can you share your experience with us? Are there really different challenges regarding gender, or how do you consider that?
Yeah, well, thanks for the invitation to participate, and thanks for waiting for me to join. Really, I think the broader challenges are challenges with mentorship in general. And Carla mentioned kind of her perspective on the opportunities that were created. But the flip side of that is that when you give somebody the opportunity to pursue a particular research area or interaction for leadership, it maybe getting back to the point that Jude was making earlier, is that you have to be ready as someone who's being mentored to actually seize that opportunity and make the most of it. And I think that many of the challenges that I've seen with mentoring people in general is that they don't take those opportunities quite as seriously or address them. And I think, to Carla's credit and to Loretta's credit, every opportunity they've been given, they've seized that and moved it forward, and that creates even more opportunities, right? It enriches the relationship. It creates the opportunities to be able to leverage those first opportunities to many more. And then opportunities for leadership on your own that help to hopefully mentor those that come behind you. And so, from my perspective, many of those issues that there may be in mentorship are more on the side of kind of balancing and understanding what the opportunity you're given and taking the greatest advantage of it.
So by what you are sharing with all of us, I think mentoring is essential for success and for having a good opportunity in careers. What would be your advice for other mentors, mentoring women, or I think we need more mentors. Maybe in different parts around the world, there aren't as many mentors as you have in big centers in US and Europe.
Yeah, my real advice is to recognize how rewarding it can be. I mean, I think there really will not be protected time assigned for mentorship. In my rare situation, I actually got an NCI grant to be a mentor. It's an NCI grant that the NCI got rid of because they didn't think that funding mentorship was really the best use of their money within their portfolio, that they could fund it in other ways like training programs. But in general, there is not going to be funding or support for mentorship. That doesn't make it any less valuable. And so figuring out how you will protect your own time as a mentor to be able to do that is absolutely critical. And realizing how rich those interactions can be in terms of your own career development. I mean, I've been paid back multifold in the people that I have mentored who have become leaders and created more opportunities for others. And created opportunities for my own career. I mentored Loretta when I was a young faculty member at Emory, and lo and behold, more than a decade later, MD Anderson, where she left is who hired me back to become chair of the Department of Lymphoma there, probably in a large part due to having a successful mentee that was there that showed my ability to be a leader in the field. So I think recognizing the value that mentorship can bring is probably one of the most important things to know as a mentor.
And Loretta, in this panel, we have males mentoring women. And don't you think we also have a responsibility to start being mentors of other women? And I think that's a way of contributing to women in lymphoma.
Oh, 100%. And I want to have a follow-on question to Chris. So he actually helped me get a job, even at the time he was trying to keep me at Emory. And so I think we have to acknowledge that there are mentors that are willing to put their own needs aside to help others. And when he was up for the job at Anderson, all I had to do was say, look, I am a product of him. So you have an example of what he could be. And that was enough to sort of convince the committee that he was a serious candidate. So I fully acknowledge the comments he made, and it comes full circle. But now, Chris, you have an opportunity to hire people across the institution, not just in the Department of Lymphoma. How do you guide us in terms of promoting women in academics in the US?
Yeah, fantastic question. And that's one that's really right on the forefront. And part of the reason why I was late for this call was meeting with our chief medical executive and our chief academic officer to talk about part of that question. How do we broaden the diversity of our institution, both in terms of women, which we have relatively clear standards for. I think that's probably the place where we've established that best. So as part of the University of Texas, this was something that started with Liz Travis, who was the head of what was called an area within our faculty on promoting women, that is now moved to become our faculty leader for diversity, equity, inclusion broadly. And she created an MD Anderson policy that was probably about 6 or 8 years ago, that every single faculty search at a leadership level had to involve include a woman in the final set of candidates and include a minority in the final set of candidates. That's actually progressed from being an MD Anderson policy to being a University of Texas across the whole university system policy. The places where we're thinking about extending that policy now is not just at the leadership level, but at every single faculty search that we're involved in. And I think, and there are two components to that. One is creating the rule, but the second component is making sure that very strong candidates get included in that search process for every single position. And I'll say, we're going through a chair search for one of our chairs in the division, and that rule was not met at the very beginning. And so then we said we need to expand the search to be able to meet the rule. And we had some outstanding women candidates that became some of our very top candidates. Well, had that rule not been there, we may not have extended the search to be able to force that process. But I think even before considering that component of it, we really need to make sure that we get those kinds of outstanding candidates into the academic environments where they can potentially be supported. I think the other component of that, though, is promoting policies and publicizing policies so that women know that they're moving to academic environments where that support and nurturing environment will exist. Because I think we have that where that it doesn't appear to exist, you're not going to get candidates who are willing to put their names forward to apply.
Right, nor are you going to likely retain the women that you already have, because it's not cultivating an environment that's nurturing to their well-being and the multifaceted aspects about that go into being a woman in academic medicine.
And Chris, if I can ask, how can we filter that out? Because you've got a fantastic model there, and it's a very proactive model that really could be adopted in other parts of the world. You're leading the way there. How can the Women in Lymphoma organization help other countries to achieve this?
Yeah, I think kind of understanding what needs to be there in terms of kind of the infrastructure of the model. Now, I could say that we have that model in place. We have a policy in place. Loretta can tell you whether our culture is really one that is universally nurturing of women faculty across the board. I would say that we have not quite hit the mark there universally across the faculty. Now, some of that takes time and probably decades or generations to change the shape and face of what our faculty look like, and to create environments that are more nurturing. But I think you have to start with that vision in mind. There have to be enough leaders that promote that vision. I think one of the things that I've been very impressed about at MD Anderson is that vision holds all the way through our entire faculty. So, I just mentioned I just left a meeting with our CAO, our Chief Academic Officer, who's a woman, Karen Hagberg, our Chief Medical Executive, Walela Tarefe, who's a woman who leads all of our faculty. And each of their offices have actually grown to put more women in leadership roles. And so I think it's a process, but it's a process that has to cascade from somewhere.
Can I just pick up on that, Chris? I was just looking through our membership list for the Male Champions of Change Committee, and they all come from the UK, the US, and Australia. We don't have any representation from any other country in the world. And it strikes me that if we're going to get this message across, we probably need to broaden this out and start identifying male champions of change in every single country so that we can start influencing this process, because that's what Women in Lymphoma is about. It's a global organization helping women around the world. And many of us here on the call have benefited from strong mentorship relationships that have supported us and nurtured us to achieve our potential. But many of the people who are dialing in are not in that fortunate position. So do you think that's a good idea? Do you think we should strive to achieve that?
I think it is. I think, there are many other countries. So one of the things that I've been engaged in is through that Carla may have mentioned, is through the ASH Clinical Research Training Institute. That's where I first met Carla. ASH also has a clinical research training institute in Latin America. And one of our newly hired faculty members is someone who has connections to many of the lymphoma groups in those countries. They have very different kinds of constraints that affect the ways that they're able to do research. So for instance, just to give a small example, many of the countries in Latin America usually work two different jobs in order to have an academic job. So you have an academic job where you're paid very little to take care of patients and you're able to do research, but you have another private practice job where you actually make enough money to feed your family. And so you can imagine women and all physicians in that situation have a very different practice environment to be able to do research and to be promoted. But I think through both of those organizations, we have connections and of lymphoma experts in those countries. I'd be happy to help to use that as a starting point.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Kim, I just say, I do think this is really important because there are many territories that have a very different academic hierarchy to some of the countries that the examples that you have given. And I think that we need to work through organizations like this to try and help promote the message to some of these areas where that pyramidal structure is very different to the ones that we work under.
Thanks for that, Andy.
I guess the other thing that I would say to Andy is that, in response to Andy's comment, is that kind of hierarchy is not leadership necessarily, right? And we've seen many examples, Loretta and Carla being two, where you've had leaders, but leaders who were at the lowest level of the academic hierarchy when they were both assistant professors, who are now moving up the ranks, but have taken on national leadership roles even before they were leaders in their own institutions.
Yep, completely agree.
Okay, well, thank you very much to everyone. I think this was wonderful. I think we all learned a lot from mentors and mentees. And I think we should keep on talking about all of these important topics in different meetings, not only in Women in Lymphoma, where we are all interested in these advances. I also agree that this takes a lot of time, a lot of generations. I'm from Argentina, where we also need more generations, but I think we need to start. So this is a good way to start. So thank you very much. Thank you all for being present today. And I want to also thank everyone, Women in Lymphoma, all our participants. And I want to encourage you to please join us again in just 4 hours for our next session on Women in Lymphoma's Change Championship Committee and mentees, where we will have different opinions and more expertise telling us about their experience. So thank you very much. And also thank you for our sponsors, Beijing, BMS, and Janssen. And I hope we keep in touch.
Thank you.
And just to correct my earlier error, of course, we do have some male champions of change like Gilles Thal and Christian Steidel, who are, although they are in the north, they have originated in other parts of the world. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is I think we need to diversify for many countries across the world in our representation. Thank you so much, everyone, for a fantastic session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.